As big as the cannabis industry gets, they'll never spend more money than the U.S. government. We have lower margins with that work. There's, in my opinion, a higher potential for much, much more revenue.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside. Woo!
Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Eric Hornung, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Hanging Modifier himself, Jay Klaus. Jay, how's it going, man?
You just came up with that nickname. We're talking 60 seconds ago.
Look, sometimes you don't need to think a long time about something to get it just right.
Eric and I were just having an argument. Mostly I was trying to pick a fight with Chance the Rapper's verse on the remix of the Francis and the Lights song, May I Have This Dance, where Chance says, I love you more than your mother, more than you love yourself. And I was arguing that the phrase, I love you more than your mother, is a grammatically flawed sentence because it uses something called a hanging modifier. If you say, I love you more than your mother, you're either saying, I love you more than I love your mother, or I love you more than your mother loves you. And I'm saying that's a problem for me.
And I said, Jay, shut up. This is a dumb conversation. But what I really said is that it seems like Chance is relying on repetition and elliptical sentences, which is the cutoff of an end or beginning of a sentence, to say, I love you more than your mother loves you. That's the whole idea here.
The whole reason I'm arguing this is because my mother loves me, and my mother is an English teacher, and she has brought this idea up to me many times in the past. My oldest sister is an English teacher. I'm around a lot of English teachers. That should give me more street cred in this conversation.
Yeah, but that's the problem, is this is poetry, and there's no grammar in poetry, Jay.
That's your better point. Yes, I will concede on that point, but I don't like it.
So in case anyone's keeping track, over the course of the Upside podcast, Jay and I have had approximately 234 arguments of which there is no purpose, and I think I'm 233-1.
I don't think that's true. What was the one that I won? That beige foods?
No, you're about to win this. You're about to win this one. I'm giving you this one already.
Nice. Well, I also won the argument about beige foods. There are no bad beige foods.
We found one. There's tapioca. Shout out to Susie.
It took you days to find that. I don't count that as a win for you.
Jay, I started this intro saying that sometimes things come to you very quickly. You don't need to think about them for a while. Sometimes you just got to think about them for a while. And in either case, I'm right.
This is more like the scientific method, though. Like, there is no ultimately proving of anything. You can only disprove something, which I guess you kind of did.
Before we head down that rabbit hole.
I don't know what I'm arguing here. Well,
dig us out of this one, Jay. Dig us out of this one.
Speaking of fabricated arguments, today we are speaking with Rich Stapleton, the co-owner of GTI Fabrication. GTI Fabrication creates modular containerized solutions. Products include modular showers, kitchens, gyms, farms, offices, mobile beverages, modular construction, and currency mining units.
This is just so up our alley, huh?
Is it? The company was founded in 2015, based in Buffalo, New York. Eric, you found GrowTech Industries, or what was previously known as GrowTech Industries, now referred to as GTI Fabrication. What piqued your interest here?
I was getting dinner with a friend in New York, and he was talking about how one of his friends had started a company doing fabrication. That's the founder of GrowTech. He was talking about the different uses they could have to kind of scale up this business. One of them at the time was pre-fabbing cryptocurrency mining rigs. I think we had this conversation in late 2017, and kind of selling them off as, okay, these modular units can be stored for cryptocurrency. And I think what they've moved into is this idea of vertical farming for the cannabis industry.
What a pivot. So this company on its face, and I say this because I reached out to Eric researching this and said, this seems outside of our wheelhouse here. On its face, does not seem like your typical venture company. To this point, they are bootstrapped, to my understanding. Their team has grown from 10 to 25 employees over the last few months. And yeah, I'm interested to hear, especially after our conversation with Wayne of Periodic Edibles, what's going on with this Cannabox container product that they're working with.
Right. And I think that we also just kind of see something here that we like to explore on the Upside podcast, which is the fringes of entrepreneurship. So the tech entrepreneurs get so much of the limelight, but there are some really great entrepreneurs doing things in areas outside of tech that we like to highlight here as well and learn from.
And as we go through this interview with Rich, if you have thoughts, please tweet at us at UpsideFM or email us hello@upside.fm. And we'll get to that interview with Rich right after this. But before we do that, let's bring in Devin Spencer, an employment attorney at Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister, to teach us a little bit about handling employee matters. Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister is a full-service law firm known for assisting entrepreneurs across the heartland. As a reminder, the following remarks by Taft attorneys are for informational purposes only and are not legal advice. This information is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No person or organization should act upon this information without first seeking professional counsel. Devin, thanks for coming on. How are things going in Columbus for you?
Thanks for having me on today. Very excited to be here. Things in Columbus are thriving. The energy here is great. Businesses are growing. I am lucky to be practicing here in Columbus in employment law, which is also an exciting area to be in, as we're going to talk about.
It is crazy how many great businesses are growing in Columbus, but sometimes those businesses stop growing and they need to fire someone. And of course, no one looks forward to firing an employee, but what do founders need to consider before, during, and after firing an employee?
So issues related to terminating employees make up about 40% of what I do. We deal with a variety of issues under this termination umbrella. So I'm going to touch briefly on before, during, and after a termination. Terminations have to be planned carefully at every move. As a general note, always document issues along the way. Document performance issues in writing the whole way. You have to have a basis for your termination. So first, before the termination, consider the reason and circumstances to make sure that it is not unlawful. What I mean by this is, for example, ask yourself, is the employee absent on some protected leave under a federal or state law? Are they engaging in some protected activity under Title VII? Or are they in a protected class and engaging in protected activity? Or are there issues involved under the Americans with Disabilities Act? By taking a minute to step back and looking at the situation, you save yourself a lot of heartache in the long run. That being said, during the termination itself, you may want another person present, depending on the circumstances. Before that conversation with the employee occurs, though, make sure the employee is cut off from access to your company's systems. You don't want an employee who has just been terminated to have access to your company's valuable information. So after the termination, there's a variety of issues you're going to want to consider, but that's beyond the scope of the time we have here today. I will say terminations are an area where having a small legal bill up front for preventative issues, supervisor training, severance agreement reviews, handbook reviews can save your company and you a big legal bill in the long run with wrongful termination, discrimination suits, that kind of thing.
Super helpful, Devin. If people want to learn more about Taft or the work that you do, where should they go?
Our website is www.taftlaw.com. You can search by attorney name or practice group. If you search my name, Devin Spencer, my bio will come up, or you can search our labor employment practice group, which is full of valuable resources. We have experts in every area, and we can help with all these unique issues that come up. My contact information is on my attorney page. Feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call.
Rich, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. I was excited when I got the email from you guys, so I obviously did a little research on your podcast. It's real impressive what you guys got going on. So
thanks, man. We like to start on Upside with a background of the founder. So can you tell us about the history of Rich?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Rome, New York, which is near Syracuse area, central New York. I went to high school there, played sports throughout high school, Canisius College to play lacrosse. And that's kind of how it landed me out in Buffalo, where I am now, where we started the business. Growing up, I was always around kind of a blue collar mentality. My father has a company. I've been working for him since I was, since I could walk, really. always helping with little things here and there. And then when I was about 14, I went to work, legitimately working for him. So I've kind of been, I guess, a blue collar individual pretty much my entire life, from the start of things. So, I guess that's where I'm from. That's a little bit about me.
And sorry, maybe I missed this. What was your dad's company? What type of work was that?
They provide what's called temporary life support. So they do base camps for the military, disaster relief. They do all the associated services and things like that. So, if there's a natural disaster and first responders need a camp to stay in, to live in, they'll come in and do all the temporary housing, temporary water, showers, toilets, kitchens, things like that, food service. So, I did a lot of, fabrication of certain things for them. And then I worked in their operations department. We'd go from, location to location, setting up these camps. Like I said, I've been doing that for quite some time before I branched off on my own.
What types of things did you learn from your dad as an entrepreneur growing up?
He's been a resource, definitely. I went to school I got a degree in entrepreneurship, and that was very helpful. Learned a lot through that. But the most important, and I think the most realistic things I've learned, not only from experience, but from my father, who he's got 20 years experience owning his own business. So him and my mother always instilled hard work. You've got to earn everything you've got. You're not given anything. That was probably the most important lesson, is you can get anything you want in this world by just working your off, and that was always a good lesson. And then, he's always a great resource. Anytime I have questions, I mean, I still use him to this day, because he's just got a plethora of knowledge from, the experiences he's had and what he's been through. So, I'd say, day to day, just questions, anything from, legal advice with the business to, how you're moving your money around. It's always great to bounce things off him, because he's always got some kind of answer, some kind of idea of where to look or who to ask,
Who else do you have as a mentor in that capacity?
Him, and then I've got my professor from Canisius College, Dr. Kim. She was the head of the entrepreneurship department. She's a great resource too. I mean, her family's got businesses all over South Korea and in the States, so she's always a good resource. I'll bounce things off her every once in a while, meet up with her, and she's always got good advice for questions I've got too.
Can you talk about your entrepreneurship class experience? Was it mostly geared toward like tech and startups, or was it more geared towards a different type of entrepreneurship?
I would say yes. It was definitely based on more of tech savvy businesses, groundbreaking businesses, things like that are really, changing certain industries and prominent industries like the tech industry. And I guess we really fit that mold, but obviously there were still a lot of good things that that I pulled out of that class, and a lot of it had to do with, management, finances, stuff that goes hand in hand with whatever business you're running. And it could be used in either way, but a lot of it was more of your, I guess, typical startup type businesses was the focus. And that was a lot of the other business pitches and ideas that a lot of people had were more focused on that.
What was the program like? I didn't take part in an entrepreneurship program when I was in college. I've always kind of wondered how that major is structured, because to me, entrepreneurship is a very practical application type thing. So can you talk about what types of classes were in that?
Yeah, you obviously take your basic management, finance classes, things like that. But what really set it up was you actually applied what you're learning into like real world situations. So you would actually mock run small businesses. So, there would always be your big project in certain entrepreneurship classes was, for example, my freshman year, we had to come up with, it was like an expedited small business. So you come up with a product or a service that you could do, that you could take start to finish in a very short period of time. And the goal was to see how much revenue you could generate with 4 people in a group and an idea. And our idea was, because we kind of were lazy about it, but our idea was taking beads and selling them at a Bills game, but even with that, it was a learning experience that, things, even something super simple like that you think, oh yeah, it's a no brainer, it'll work. There's still a lot of planning and execution involved that if you're not prepared and if you're not willing to do that, then it just won't work out. So I guess even those types of things, they had good learning experiences, even how simple they might have been. And then as the years progressed, like my senior year, you had to, when you were a freshman and obviously things evolved, you had a business idea, and all of it was kind of geared after your sophomore year. It was geared towards actually developing that business in the hopes that once you graduate, you implement it, and up to my senior year, that's what it was. We were writing business plans. We were having them reviewed by not only our professor, but other mentors, things like that. So, I think what sets it, like I said, what sets it apart from just a business course is the actual implementation of what you're learning.
When did the idea for GTI first arise? Was that sophomore year? How many business plans did you write for that? Kind of walk us through. Was this part of the curriculum or did this happen outside of it?
It came about my senior year. So since my freshman year, my thing, or even in high school, what I always wanted to do was own a brewery. Not because I like brewing beer. I really enjoy drinking beer. I like the fact that, it brings people together and things like that. So that was always a field that I wanted to get into. I learned my freshman year of college when I was actually starting to work on a business plan for it. And I actually started brewing beer. And I realized I didn't like brewing beer at all. I didn't have the patience for it. All the beer I made tasted like so it just wasn't for me, And I still have, I would love to be in that industry someday, but not in the capacity as I am now with what I'm doing now. So, as my ideas evolved, me and my brother started another small business, I think my sophomore year. As opposed to brewing beer, we wanted to, because we were always around special events, working for my father's company, doing water systems and things like that. So we would do some music festivals. And we noticed the beer consumption was very inefficient. So we started a small business doing beverage distribution for special events. We did a couple small jobs here and there because I was in school, he was in school. So we did a couple small jobs. That's really where I wanted to go with things. I liked it. I liked the event aspect of things. I liked how so much work goes into, months of planning, months of work go into a 3-day event, and then it all gets torn down and leaves. So I always thought that was pretty cool. And I really liked being around that atmosphere. So we were really pushing that. And then, like I said, things just didn't take off super well. We did a couple small things here and there, and then my mother actually brought up and now let me back up, I guess. So GTI's got 2 branches. One of them, we do business. We build modular structures for defense customers, oil and gas, construction, agriculture, things like that. And then the other side of things which is a branch of GTI, it's called Cannabox. And we build growing facilities for cannabis cultivators, legal cannabis cultivators all over the country and Canada. So that's really how we got started. Was my mother made the comment, I think she said it jokingly, is like, oh, you should get into this cannabis industry. And, we've had experience building modular structures in the past for working for my father's company. So we started doing some research and found there was a huge need for growing facilities as the industry started evolving. And then we started seeing a big boom in urban farming. So growing vegetables in areas that you traditionally can't grow vegetables, in city centers, things like that. So we built a couple farms, and we actually operated a small vegetable farm in Buffalo out of a couple shipping containers. We sold to a couple local markets, restaurants, grocery stores. It was a nice little business, but that was another thing, another learning curve. I learned I didn't really like farming. I didn't like the actual operations aspect of it. It's a lot of work for very minimal return. So I have huge respect for people who do farming for a living, because it is a lot of hard work. So we started to see that maybe that wasn't the space for us, and we focused back on the cannabis side of things.
Before I dive too far down the rabbit hole of Cannabox, something I wanted to ask you about. Your father's an entrepreneur. I asked you a couple questions on that already. Did he ever try to get you to come join the family business and work for him versus doing all these other businesses that you tried?
Yeah, definitely. We never really had a conversation. I was maybe a junior, senior in college. I think it might have just been kind of assumed that it would be something that I wanted to do. And it's a great company. It's not that I didn't like working for it or wouldn't want to be a part of it. That wasn't it at all. I really liked what I did there. I love what that company does. It's an amazing company. But, we had a conversation one night, and he asked me if I'd be interested in, or if my plan was to work and take over that business. I told him no. And we talked about it. He didn't really make too much of a fuss about it then, but we talked about it after, and he told me it was kind of like a what the moment for him. He was like, he's kind of pretty taken back, like, why the hell wouldn't he want to do this? We had a talk about it another night. I told him, I said, you built that business from the ground up. You made your thing, and I'd like to make my own. I'd like to do it the same way you did it. Like I said, at first he was a bit taken back, but then, he said he respected the shit out of that, completely understood. And, now he's, and he's our biggest supporter. He would do anything to help us. And one of our biggest supporters, my mother being the other one, obviously. So definitely a conversation we had. And I think it was a shock to not only him, but a lot of different people that I would rather, grind it out and do something on my own as opposed to taking over something that's already so very well established.
Okay, so you have these two lines of business now. How long were you doing the modular structures before you dove into the second branch on the cannabis side?
Yeah, the cannabis side of things actually came first. We had experience building the modular structures with my father's company because they use them on their operating bases and things like that. So we started with the cannabis stuff, and then we realized we were pretty efficient builders, and there was a whole other market out there, commercially, defense-wise, of different structures that needed to be built. So we saw a big, and a lot of the building we do is based out of shipping containers. We also do a lot of ground-up modular stuff because a lot of people, certain customers that we deal with, don't want the shipping container look, but they want the benefits. They want the benefits of modular building. Do a bit of both of that. Mainly, like I said, most of what we do is Connex based, but the cannabis stuff actually came first.
What are the benefits of modular building?
So it's a more efficient process because you have, like us, for example, we have an assembly line. So we have guys who are specialized in that exact trade of what they're doing. So factory building, you have a lot less waste. You have a much quicker timeline because, like I said, specialized labor. If you're building a structure in a certain area that doesn't necessarily have a good labor pool, you get a lot slower building process. You get sometimes lower quality. But if you have consistency in your labor pool, what you do when you work out of a factory, you're going to have higher turnover and you're going to have a much higher quality product. And generally speaking, it's about a 15 to 25% cost savings to traditional construction.
Can you describe for me what the actual product looks like and what the experience is like for one of the growers, for example?
Yeah, so the product itself from the inside looks no different than any indoor growing facility. And from the outside, it just looks like a bank of corrugated steel boxes. And a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people look at Cannabox and think that it's some magical box that's better than traditional indoor growing. It's truly no different. It's just a more efficient, cost-effective way of building it. So you get to market quicker, you do it less expensively, and you can expand a hell of a lot easier. As far as differences in appearance, the inside looks identical as opposed, and then the outside, like I said, it's corrugated steel as opposed to siding you'd see on any other traditional metal building.
Who's ordering Cannaboxes? And are you creating them before you get orders? Like, are you running an inventory of Cannabox?
No. So everything we do is custom built because in an industry where there's so many different ways to do what they do. And everybody has a preferred method of lighting, preferred method of watering, preferred method of drying cannabis. I mean, there's just so many different variables. It's tough to try to pitch one way to do it. So we found that's what we originally wanted to do, was have a standard model, but we found out that everybody wanted to change the model. So we don't have anything sitting on the shelf. We've tried doing like rental type units before, but same with that. It's people look at them and they're always like, let's change this, let's change that, let's change this before we take it. So we did away with stocking anything like that. And as far as who's buying them, we've got growers all over the U.S. Every time a state becomes legalized, we get a huge boom of customers from there. Like Oklahoma, for example, legalized recently. We've got a number of customers there. The big legalization in Canada was huge for us. We've got dozens of customers across Canada. So really it's legal cannabis growers all over North America is really our customer basis right now. We get some interest internationally. We get stuff from Australia and Europe sometimes.
Let's stay on the Cannabox side for a second. The pricing, if it's all custom builds, how does pricing work?
Yeah, so pricing it's similar to, if you were pricing out a construction job. We have estimators. We take exactly what the customer is looking for. We, give them an estimate of what the project will look like. Then we go through the engineering process, the design process, and then we can give them an exact cost of what they're going to be paying for that installation.
And from a cash flow perspective, because you guys are bootstrapped, right?
Yes.
So this seems like a pretty capital intensive business. Do you guys collect payment for what you're going to be constructing so you can buy the materials to do it? Or did you have to work up to a point where you had enough cash on hand to do like a net 30 type situation?
Yeah, so that's the benefit of, with our private customers at least. So in the Cannabox side of things, we take down payments for everything. So we are never in a situation where we're in the red or we need funding or anything like that, because banks will not loan. Even though we don't touch the plant, we have a very hard time, even with our government work, we have a hard time getting money due to the fact that we deal with the cannabis industry. There's nothing federally illegal about what we're doing. We're just the same as a company selling a cannabis grower hoses or tables or something like that. It's no different, but they see the name, they see what we do. We're pretty well known in the cannabis space, so it's scary to banks. So, but yeah, no, we get down payments for everything, and so it actually works out pretty well that way.
How many of these? I'm going to stick all my questions on Cannabox for a second before we expand over to oil and gas, construction, military, and agriculture. Like, how many of these can you guys do in a month, a day, a week? I don't know what the appropriate time frame is.
Sure. So that depends a little bit on, I guess, the intricacy of them. But we could build anywhere between, I guess, our current capacity right now is between 15 and 20 containers a month, and that's with our current staff. We could run another shift or two more shifts and virtually double or triple that if we needed to.
Is a buyer buying one container, or would I be buying like 3 containers, 5 containers?
So it's usually, we have some people buy one-offs, but for the most part, it's 10, 15, 20 containers, sometimes more. I guess, like I said, we get them here and there, but rarely is it really ones and twos.
So it's usually, you could be working on one order for a month.
Yeah.
If you got an order today for 500 Cannaboxes, how would you handle that?
We get asked that sometimes, because certain people will come to us for numbers like that. We've got, right now we work out of a 40,000 square foot warehouse. Like I said, we run one shift, 10 hours a day. So we've got another 40,000 square feet that we could expand into. And, we could run 2 more shifts a day to really max out. We definitely have a very good expansion capability. We've got a pretty good labor pool with where we're working and what we're doing. It's a little more desirable than traditional construction because you're out of the elements. So we've got a good spot to get labor. So, we'd obviously need 3-4 weeks, maybe a little more than a month to ramp up to that capacity, but it wouldn't be an issue. I wouldn't be nervous about that at all.
Why is Buffalo a good labor pool for this type of work?
That's a blue collar city. There's a lot of good tradesmen in Buffalo. And it's kind of dying out, but it was dying out a little bit, but it's coming back. They're coming out with a lot of different trades training programs in Buffalo. I forget the name of the one, but it's this massive training center that they just built that's going to be pumping out hundreds of students a year that are going to be proficient with HVAC, plumbing, welding, framing, things like that. So it's a very good spot where, there's a lot of construction going on, a lot of things like that. So I think the labor pool is just going to get better and better. We've had issues in the past, but we're lucky to the point where we're manufacturing construction, but we're out of the elements. So it's a bit more enticing than certain general construction jobs.
What are your major costs as a business? You have a 40,000 square foot warehouse. You have how many employees?
30 now. 30 employees.
30 employees. Materials are expensive, but where's the breakdown? What's the biggest cost? What's the smallest cost?
Our biggest costs are material for the jobs we're doing and labor by far. That's majority of our cost. Our administrative costs are very low. We've got a pretty small front office. We try to keep that as lean as possible. Even with how much business we do, we don't have a massive business development team. Like I said, we keep that pretty lean, just like we keep everything else. So, I would say, like I said, material and labor is definitely our cost. And then obviously our overhead it's not cheap, but it's definitely not comparable to the other two.
What's it like to ship one of these things?
So we ship them two different ways. Majority of the time we ship them on the back of a flatbed truck. You can ship them by rail, but sometimes that becomes a bit cumbersome and it's sometimes harder. It's cheaper, but sometimes it's just a logistical nightmare. So usually we just put them on the back of trucks and send them down the road.
Given that they are shipping containers, could you not just put them on ships? Or are they so changed on the outside that you can't just pop them on? That might be a very dumb question, by the way.
No, it's not at all. It depends what you do to them. So they're called ISO containers. So if the modifications extend beyond they call them the ISO caster. Those are the corner extends beyond that. It's not ISO compliant anymore, so you can't put it on a ship. If it does, if it fits within that envelope, if it's got a door on it, but the door's got a low profile doorknob, so it doesn't stick out beyond that corner, you could put them on a ship. Yeah. So, and that's what, some of the international things we're looking at, or even, we've got jobs going on or we're designing now down in the Virgin Islands and things like that. All that has to be within the ISO casters so they can be put on a barge and shipped down there.
We've spent all this time talking about Canabox. I assumed that that's probably the majority of the volume of business that you guys do. But if that's not correct, I'm interested to hear, how much of a proportion is Canabox versus the other types of structures that you do?
Right now, it's about a 50-50 split. Obviously, on the cannabis side of things, it's all coming from growers in the cannabis industry. On the other side of things, a majority of that work is coming from either the Department of Defense directly. So we hold certain government contracts, and then the other majority of that comes from, we're a subcontractor to different large business DoD contractors.
I kind of want to talk about the military contracts, the DoD contracts a little bit more. How did you get them? They're really hard to get, right?
Yeah, I mean they're not. I have a lot of experience with it. I guess they're not easy to get. But my father's company, they had experience procuring government work. So that was always a very good resource for me. That's where I learned where we should be looking, who we should be talking to. Everything I know about that, except from experience, came from my father. So that was a huge resource getting into that. And I think that definitely cut the learning curve down significantly, because we're bidding on contracts now that as a 3-4-year-old company, we really I'm not going to say we don't have business doing it, but we're definitely young for bidding on some of these deals.
Rich, so as your team is growing, and it's grown a lot over the past year, it sounds like, and it sounds like you could ramp up production pretty quickly. If you took on a whole lot of orders, does this scale in any way, or do your costs just kind of keep up with the amount of orders that you would be taking in?
No, there would be a point where we definitely see we'd need some growth in our front office. We'd have to bring in we just need more managers. When you get that, and that's something we're learning now, when you have that many people in such a big footprint of space, it's tough to manage that with a foreman. You know what I mean? So we've been working, putting different management in place, different people in different places. But that's what that's doing is taking people that were directly costed to a job, and now that's adding it to our overhead. So as we scale, there's definitely costs associated with that, but it's compared to the amount of work we're getting out of it, it's really not that bad.
Which side has higher margins, the Canabox or the DoD contracts?
Canabox, definitely Canabox.
As a business owner, does that make you more interested? You said you're about 50-50. Do you see a world where you're just doing 100% Canabox, or why not? I don't
know, because as big as the cannabis industry gets, they'll never spend more money than the U.S. government. We have lower margins with that work. There's, in my opinion, a higher potential for much, much more revenue with what we do. In the cannabis industry, there's going to come a point where people are done building facilities. You know what I mean? Once, as these states legalize, I think we've got a healthy pipeline and a healthy timeline of work to be done, but eventually it won't dry up completely, but once there's so many facilities in places, once bigger companies come in and they have their 2 million square foot greenhouses, a lot of what we do will start to diminish. I don't see that coming soon or anything, but it's something that we know is going to happen eventually. So we don't want to throw all our eggs in one basket and, that be that.
We talked a little bit about what the Cannabox product looks like. What does the product look like for the DoD and as a subcontractor? Like, is it still all modular? Kind of walk me through what you are doing there as much as you are allowed to.
Yeah, definitely. And for most of what we do, I can share pretty much everything. We're really not working on anything quote unquote mission critical right now. So yeah, I mean, we have a wide range of things that we build for this side of things. So, for a large bit, this DoD contractor we work with, we build containerized kitchens, we build containerized showers, toilets, sleeping units, we build offices. We've bid on jobs doing modular dog kennels, modular medical clinics, things like that. Right now, actually, the job site I'm on right now, we're building it's a 60 container Mout Village, which Mout Village is military operations and urban terrain. So basically, you mock up a city and they do their training in there. And that's an area that we're really looking to break more and more into because there's a lot of work with it, and a lot of them like to go modular because they can rearrange them at a later date. Generally, it's quite a bit cheaper.
That sounds really cool. I want to hear more about this modular city. What does that look like?
It literally looks like a little city built out of shipping containers. This particular one, it's on Maxwell Air Force Base down here in Alabama. And it's, like I said, it's constructed a 60 container, double stacked out different ways. This particular one they're going to use for escape. I forget what it's called, but basically it's conduct after they've been captured. If they've been captured and put in a certain situation, they have to not only work on rescuing that person, but getting out of that situation. And that's what this particular facility is going to be used for.
That sounds like the most intense paintball type facility that I've ever heard of.
Yeah. And some of them, that's what they train with. So, but yeah, that's exactly what you're picturing is exactly what it is. There's a lot of different structures or kind of things that fall within that realm that are very similar. Like right now, we're working on a burn house. So it's a mock building that they're going to use for fire rescue training. So it's similar to what we're doing here, but it different purposes.
How has your role changed as an owner of this company as your team has grown? So
in the beginning, I did a little bit of everything. I do the administrative stuff. I would do, obviously sales. I would do. I'd even have to go out there and weld and put some of these units together. I've moved away from that, but even now I still do a bit of the administrative stuff, and I still handle business development on the cannabis side of things. I really don't handle anymore. I did a lot when we started out, but we've got kind of a team for that. But I still pretty much exclusively handle all the business development for the government side of things, which is where I like to be. That's where I'd rather be. And as we are adding more people, we're putting more administrative people in places, so I don't really have to handle much of that. I mean, I still handle a bit of it now, but ideally I'd be completely out of that, and I can handle what I'd rather handle is the big decisions and the business development.
Who else are you competing against here on the Cannabox side and on the government side?
So on the government side, obviously we compete against traditional construction companies. And then as far as very similar products, there's a couple other companies that do pretty much exactly what we do. We've seen that we usually beat them on price. A lot of them don't build their own stuff. They market it and then they outsource it to a company like us. So generally we beat them on price because we build everything in-house at our factory. So I'm not saying anything bad. I don't know too much about the companies. I don't know them personally, but from what I've seen, it seems like we got quite a bit more of a market share than them. And then on the other side of things, with the government end of things, there's a good amount of companies that do similar stuff to us. I think we have a much better grasp of the government system. We have a healthy business development plan with that. I think we're good at finding opportunities, and then as we get more and more of these jobs, we've got very good past performance. So I think a lot of that helps us keep winning that work.
How much of the government side is who you know versus what you know?
At this point for us, it's a lot of what you know. we're not deeply embedded. We don't have a long laundry list of contacts of people we've been working with for how many ever years. So a lot of it for us right now is what you know. I know that industry can become a bit of who you know, but for us, it's pretty much only what we know, because there's solicitations that we find, that there's been people tracking it for years, and we come in and are very competitive just based off of, we take a look at what we need to do, and we implement a very good strategic plan. We've just got good experience building those types of products.
What does the sales cycle look like for a government contract? I assume it's long.
It is, yeah, usually. So basically what happens is generally a solicitation will come out. There's a website called Federal Business Opportunities, and 95% of, from my understanding at least, a vast majority of what the government procures will come through that website. So there are certain keywords and things that we track. So we'll find the business through or we'll find the opportunity through that. And then, we take a look at it. If it's something that we want to spend our time going after, we make that decision. And then generally it goes through a market research process. It goes through a pre-solicitation, and then the solicitation will go live. You have so many days or weeks to put a bid in on it, depending on the intricacy of the project or what they're looking for. And then, they can come back and award that within days, or it could be months. We've got a 5-year deal with the Naval Sea Warfare Command to build all of the AR-500 steel targets for the Navy SEALs. That one took 3 or 4 months to award. And then this job we're doing now, I think that took a couple days. It all depends on what the job is and what the government's needs are.
That's shorter than I would have assumed, actually. So that's really interesting to hear. On the Canabox side, you keep saying that you have a really good name in that space. Are you guys getting most of your business just from word of mouth and inbound leads at this point, or do you guys go out and prospect growers?
Majority of it's all inbound right now. When we started out, we did a lot of cold calling. We did a lot of, we'd spend money on trade shows and things like that. But we're starting to see now, we never really saw much of a return from that. I think it was helpful, at least the trade show side of things, because it would kind of show us or show legitimacy, I guess. The fact that we could spend the money to be there, I get type of thing. We really didn't get much direct business from that. And now we're seeing just doing some jobs, good marketing material, and I guess having a presence at some of those things. We get most of our leads inbound now. And we get inbound leads from, some of the biggest cultivators in the world.
What's next? You talked earlier about this idea of looking into vertical farming. You tried to run that. You didn't really like it. But it seems like you're kind of prying for what the next thing is. You mentioned oil and gas. You mentioned construction. You mentioned agriculture. Is it just going to be military and Canabox for the future? Or are you actively looking for what the next product is or what the next industry is?
Yeah, we're always looking, looking at our business development plan, and I guess our overall idea of what we're doing and what else we'll look at. Let's say government opportunities, for example. We'll look at something and it might not be exactly what we do now, but it crosses some of the core competencies of what we're capable of. So, we'll start to do research on things like that to see if maybe that's something we break into in the future. Like one of those, just off the top of my head, examples is body armor. Because right now we build AR-500 targets, ballistic targets. So there's similarities between the two. They're not at all the same. One is you're shooting at and one is saving somebody's life. It's obviously very different. And I'd be naive to say that they're the same. So at this point, it's not like we can go start manufacturing armor, but it's something that, like I said, it's got some of the same core competencies. So it's something that we'd like to, do our research on and keep on our radar, something we'd like to get into.
What are your core competencies?
So I would say our core competencies are manufacturing, really. Manufacturing construction. So, really anything that falls within that, let me rephrase that, I guess, metal manufacturing and construction. There's a lot of different manufacturing that we could not do. So really, we look for any and all opportunities that we might be able to break into those things. A couple other big things that we pride ourselves on are efficiencies in logistics and quality control. So we implemented an ISO 9001 program a few months ago, which is basically just a quality standard through the International Standards Organization. So we use that. That's a big selling point for a lot of our The cannabis people really don't give a shit about it, but it is a good selling point for government agencies and different businesses that run in those circles.
I imagine with all this growth you guys have experienced over the last year or so, you've been heads down just trying to keep up with that. But piggybacking on Eric's question, do you have a vision of where this thing is going to go and what this company will be?
Yeah. Ideally, what we'd like to be is a premier modular builder. We'd like to break into spaces that aren't just shipping container based. For example, Marriott builds all their hotels modularly now. There's a lot of different developers and a lot of different businesses like that looking to go modular for all their buildings because of the cost savings and the time expedition, so I'll call it. So, right now it represents a very small percentage of the construction industry as a whole. So we think there's massive, massive growth in that. So, and not saying we do away with the shipping container stuff. I think there's a huge need for that, especially in the defense industry. There'll always be a need for that, but we'd really like to break into more traditional modular construction.
Have you thought about taking on investment towards this vision? You haven't to this point, but have you thought about it, and why have you ultimately decided not to?
Obviously, we've thought about it. The reason we haven't, we really don't want to give up control of what we're doing. The reason I wanted to get into business to begin with is so we could do what we wanted to do and we didn't have to listen to anybody else. I guess that's a little uneasy for me to think, we could take capital to try to open up a certain side of our business, but then we give up control. And I think that's something that I'd like to keep, at least for the time being.
How big can this thing get if you guys go into traditional modular, or if you don't? What's your vision of how big this can get?
Revenue-wise type deal?
Sure, revenue-wise.
Yeah, with some of the things we have in the pipeline, with some of the opportunities we're tracking over the next few years, we'd like to position ourselves to become a $100 million a year company. I think is a realistic. I'm not saying that's going to happen today or tomorrow by any means, but I think setting that goal, I think that's definitely realistic for something to happen for us in the future.
At this point, who do you look to as a role model or inspiration? Like, where do you continue to push yourself to learn as you grow as an owner of this company?
Yeah, that'd probably be my dad. That's he's kind of been my role model for this entire thing. Really, always been impressed with what he did with his business, and I've always tried to aspire to do the same. So I think that a lot of my inspiration comes from that.
What would it take to make this a $1 billion business?
A lot of work, that's for sure. But I wouldn't rule it out. That's something when we first got started. That was always kind of like the joking goal is let's make this a $1 billion business. I'm not saying we're on a fast track there or anything right now, but it's something that's possible. And I think it would take to run a business like right now. We're still in the learning process of running a business with 30 employees. To get to the point of doing billions, you need hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. So it would take a lot of work and a lot of learning. It's stuff that I think it's going to be a very slow process to get to that size of a business.
What's the hardest part for you at this point?
Hardest part is time management for me personally. Owning your own business puts a strain on a lot of other things. Puts a strain on your health. It puts a strain on your relationships. It puts a strain on a lot of things. So sometimes relationships suffer because of that. Sometimes your health suffers but you're probably not being the healthiest person you could be because you go all day without eating or drinking water because you're just pounding coffee, working your ass off, and you got one vision in your mind to get this goal done for the day. And it can be taxing, but that's probably my hardest part, and something I need to work on is finding that balance between life and work.
Spend some more time on Chippewa Street.
Yeah, right. Relax a little, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great, Rich. If people want to learn more about you or GTI Fabrication, where should they go?
So we've got our website, www.gtifabrication.com.
All right, Eric, we just spoke with Rich Stapleton, the co-owner of GTI Fabrication. Different type of episode here, talking to a bootstrapped founder in the manufacturing space. Where do you want to start?
I think I want to start with just an overarching concept that we have here on Upside, which is we started this podcast looking at how to learn and think like a venture investor. I think one thing that we found kind of over time is that there's different funding models out there that are equally interesting and that exist on the fringes of entrepreneurship. Maybe they're even the bulk of entrepreneurship and they just exist on the fringes of entrepreneurship media. So I'm excited when we have someone different on, like Rich, like GTI, who can give us a different perspective than the typical tech company that we have on.
I'm a big proponent of raising money from your customers, which is essentially, the model of what GTI is doing here. They get a down payment. They use that to buy the materials, to do the work, deliver the product, maybe collect the rest of the payment there at the end if they didn't get the whole thing. I love when businesses do that because, as Rich said, is a priority for him. You don't give up any control. You don't give anything up in terms of ownership of the company. And so even though it's not in the wheelhouse of what we normally talk to here on the show, it's something that resonates a lot with me and a lot of the people that I work with.
You threw out a little net 30 term there. Look at you, Jay.
Oh, wow. Net 30. Yeah. What was really crazy to me, actually, surprising, was the sales cycles that he talked about with the military. We just got off sharing the episode with AvWorks where I literally said in the outro, we don't talk to many companies that have military as part of their strategy. And that's exactly what Rich's team is doing here. And when I asked about the sales cycle, I was expecting him to tell me it was going to take something like 18 to 27 months to work with the military. And he said, yeah, it's long. Sometimes it's a few months after we do the procurement process, a few months. And sometimes it's a couple of days, which is much faster than I would expect, which, gives me more optimism with working with the government as part of a business strategy.
Absolutely. I wonder if it's this type of business specifically where it's not anything that's directly in the hands of a warfighter, or it's not a weaponized vehicle, or it's not a technology that has to get implemented, but it's, hey, we need these barracks essentially, or hey, we need this fake city essentially, right? Like it's something that just needs to be created and built. So it's easier to do through an RFP process than a lot more due diligence and vetting and stuff like that.
And also, yeah, the RFP process, I think what is key is the solicitation, where the government has already said, this is a priority for us. We've already set aside budget to do it if you meet the requirements of what we're looking for. And I imagine by the time you have something like that created and you're looking for someone to fill the need, you're willing to make moves pretty quickly when you see that they're checking the boxes, checking the can of boxes.
Boo. So I want to get into a little bit about how this business is structured with the two sides. We talked a little bit about military already, and then you just made a really bad pun about the Canabox side. What do you think about that kind of split focus?
Well, generally, I asked, where are the margins bigger? Maybe you asked, where are the margins bigger? And he said, on the Canabox side for sure. And so then I asked, why not just go whole hog at the Canabox side?
Whole hog.
Whole hog. And he said, we see longer term potential on the government side. They have more money. They're always going to be spending money. The Canabox side could get saturated if you just build out the infrastructure there, which makes a lot of sense. Typically, the knowledge is go where you're making the most money and just focus and drill down on that. But for the situation where he's seeing a window of opportunity versus a long-term cash cow, I think it makes sense. And it doesn't seem like the core competencies that they're using are any different. So if the laborer is doing the same type of work, it makes sense to me that they do both of these things, so long as the individuals working on them can go between the two and they don't have to worry about matching utilization of one type of laborer to one type of contract that could get a little difficult administratively.
It seems to me like the designers at the company are probably the most important people, and we didn't ask a single question about them.
We also chickened out and didn't ask how big a typical order is.
Do you just want to keep on criticizing us?
Could have done better. This is on me for being a little foggy-headed on a Saturday. But
that's an excuse, Jay. That's an excuse. I have no excuse. I just did a terrible job.
Interesting to me that, he said we could build 15 to 20 containers a month in terms of capacity right now, and often an order could be 15 to 30 containers. So they're at a point where it seems like they have more demand than supply in terms of being able to fill these orders. And I wonder why not, we kind of asked it, why not just ramp up more? Because it seems like they have the space in the building to grow into. And if on the Canabox side of things, they have a good pipeline, why not ramp up? And I wonder if it's a concern of long-term being able to, well, medium term, being able to fill the pipeline of an expanded workforce if they just expanded right now to try to nail the can of box side?
I think his answer at the end kind of gives away why they're not doing that. He's looking at this as a slower growth vehicle towards something that will be very big, but it's more of a measured growth. It's more of a conservative growth. It's more of we're not going to jump on a rocket ship to get there. We're going to he said it's going to take years to get to 100 million, and then to get to $1 billion is a lot of work. So it's like more and more time. I think it's just a slow and steady growth kind of projection and mindset, not just projection, but mindset versus, all right, let me go find some investors who are willing to like saddle up and watch this thing grow very fast. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And I think that the majority of American business people probably think more like that than they do accelerated growth.
It's kind of a fun compare and contrast with the conversation we had with Kevin McArdle and Tyler Tringus when they were discussing bootstrapped SaaS founders. Same mindset, different product. And actually, this seems to be the type of business where obviously he's ramping up to profitability faster than the SaaS side of things. But like Kevin said in that interview, a lot of founders want some level of just autonomy and financial independence and the ability to do things their own way. They like growth, but it's not growth at all costs. It's not hyper growth. I mean, I trend more that way as well. If we turn things around and we're interviewing me as a founder, I would almost certainly be in that camp, whatever business I'm doing at the time. So yeah, I certainly empathize and respect that.
What did you think about Rich as a founder?
I love hearing stories of children of entrepreneurs. It's something that I envy because I didn't even have the idea of entrepreneurship until I was early on in college. It's something I was never around as a kid. And it seems to me that I missed years of practicing and trying and failing and mostly just like sharpening my axe of how to think like an entrepreneur. I just haven't been doing it for as long as somebody like Rich has. So to me, it's awesome that he got to see it firsthand working with his dad. And he tried so many things in college. He went to college in an entrepreneurship program. But it seems to me, he understands this business well. He understands the industry well. I'm impressed with how quickly he mentioned that he was bad at prioritizing his time, but I'm surprised or impressed with how quickly it seems he managed to move himself out of some of the labor type work, because I imagine in the early days it was something where he knew it really well in and out and he was doing it, and now he hired people and delegated that out. It also seemed on the talent front that he had no concerns with being able to find labor for what in Ohio here often I hear is a limited labor market. So I was impressed with him as a founder is the short answer to my long explanation.
It is funny because every founder we talk to talks about like this talent gap, regardless of what industry they're in. And this is the first time we've heard, oh yeah, there's so much talent, it's not even funny. And there's more coming.
And we're positioned as a company in a way that people would want to work for our company versus doing, the outdoor in the elements type construction work.
Yeah, I thought that was a huge benefit for them, a potential benefit. It's going to be hard to close our deal memo here, Jay, because it doesn't seem like Rich wants to take on anyone who has an equity ownership position in his company. So let's talk about two different types of ways that you can invest in a company and maybe just kind of walk through, does it make sense here? The first one is debt. That's the other side of equity, right? Does that make sense here? Where you're essentially investing at a fixed rate in this company? And does that even, I've never heard of a early stage investor just raising a bunch of debt. That doesn't make sense to me.
Pretty outside of my sphere of knowledge here. If you're talking from like a bank's perspective, he mentioned that he has trouble getting that type of loan from a bank because he's connected to the cannabis industry. And that seems like pretty outdated thinking to me. I've heard of businesses getting bank loans on what seems to be less of a tried and true model than what Rich would be coming to them with. I mean, he could be coming with full contracts in hand and P&Ls to show their growth. So it's surprising to me that he has that type of risk profile to a bank. But tell me more about what you're saying.
So there are different types of funds in the world. Most of the ones that we talk about invest in convertible notes, and that those convertible notes convert to equity. So technically they're investing debt. But there are other types of funds that are usually higher up in the financial food chain or later in a business's life cycle that invest into the debt of a business. So maybe they'll buy public debt, like a hedge fund, or maybe they will buy out all of a company's debt and try to restructure the company through like what's called distressed fund. Or, I mean, these don't seem to be as prevalent, which was the question I was asking, like an early stage debt fund where you're investing in maybe asset heavy businesses that are just early on. And I'm not very familiar with that as a model at all.
Nope, neither am I. Go on to the next model.
So the next model is going back to what we talked with Kevin and Tyler about, which is this idea of non-ownership based financing, where it's equity-like and kind of debt-like, but it's kind of sits in the middle. So you don't own any of the company, but you're essentially getting an earnout from the company for investing. This can be a revenue sharing based model, a profit sharing based model, or what Tyler called the shared earnings agreement. That seems like it could be a fit here if you find the right investor. So the reason I wanted to bring up these kind of two competing things is we still need to answer this question. Hey, if we're an investor, what are we looking for in the next 6 to 18 months? And I think it's a little different when you're investing from those lenses than when you're investing from a pure equity play.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get my favorite answer, which is revenue. You know, I'd be looking to see, is Rich growing the team and taking on more contracts at once, increasing their capacity, moving into that expanded space maybe, but generally just increasing their capacity? And are they able to continue to feed their deal flow pipeline to make that make sense?
And I think for me, if I was going to be investing into this business in a non-equity way, I would be looking for exactly what Jay's looking for. But if I was looking at it from a equity perspective, I'd want to hear more about that vision. But I want to get your take. Do you think having equity, semi-equity, or debt really changes what you're looking at or looking for?
Yeah, I think the only thing that would change is what the ultimate upside, no pun intended, of it looks like. And if you're expecting your returns to be a equity type multiple, or if the arrangement is different, because that just changes your time horizon and how believable that plan is.
All right. Well, if you want to talk about the upside of GTI, or as Rich as a founder, or Jay and I's freezing cold takes, you can reach out to us at hello@upside.fm with anything long, or interact with us on Twitter @UpsideFM. Until then, we'll talk to you next week.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter @UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside Podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming, find a way and get it done.